Okay, looks like we have a fair amount of people in now. Thanks everyone for joining. This is our second entry in a three-part online workshop series on using schema and collections to collaborate on API design, documentation, development, pretty much anything you might need to do with an API, which is what Postman's all about. So today we're going to be talking about working across teams with version control and collections as a source of truth. Many people might not know, but Postman actually recently introduced a light version control feature in the app that allows you to fork and merge. Let's go ahead and jump right in and look at that. Before we do, however, we're just gonna go over what everything that we went over last week. So last week we talked about basically schema using OpenAPI schemas to work within Postman, and we imported this Swagger pet store collection using an OpenAPI schema using this import button. We walked through all of the different ways to comment and document your different requests, such as things like descriptions on requests, on variables, on collections themselves, and on folders. We walked through example responses, which come over when you import an OpenAPI spec. So those are always accessible above the Save button. We walked through commenting, which is a relatively new feature as well, and will be relevant to today's discussion, which exists directly below the Save button. Then we also looked at different ways to share different collections. So we looked at creating links, embedding run and Postman buttons, and we looked at sharing from workspace to workspace. And I happened to share this collection with Stacy so she could collaborate on it with me. Once we were there, we looked at workspaces and the different ways to navigate around them. That'll be important again today. Just as a refresher, this is a workspace dropdown. It allows you to look at your personal workspaces. We're in our speaking demo workspace right now, but also your team workspaces, the different ones that everyone in your company has, and pop into those and look at different collections that people might be working on there. So here we're looking at the workspace that Stacy and I share. Going back to that speaking demo workspace, you don't only have workspaces there, but we also have a web view. Sorry. Not sure what happened. Just bear with me for 1 sec, folks. Let's try that again. There we go. Which is the dashboard. So basically the online dashboard is a browser-based way to look at all of your collections. You can see that there's the same way. There's the same navigator that exists here. You're able to create new workspaces and look at all of them. You have a documentation view that is how you actually look at a collection online. If you want to see what that looks like within the app, you can actually go to the browse, and that will allow you to look at that in the queue as well. So we also looked at how to comment on this itself via the dashboard, how to publish documentation with this button, which is for public documentation, and sharing and permissions for different workspaces. So all of this is available on YouTube, and Stacy will be sharing it out in the comments in Zoom to allow you to go and check that out after this workshop if you're curious about that. As always, if you have any questions, please post them in the Zoom comments as we move forward. And we will be sure to stop and answer them. I'll be pausing after I introduce new pieces of information to give you time to process that and ask any questions that you might have. So let's get into it. We have been looking at our Swagger collection We're in the browse mode right now. We're actually going to move back to the build mode over here. So we have this this collection, and what we did previously actually is we duplicated it, made that copy and shared it, and that was how we were going to collaborate and work on things. And for a long time in Postman, that was how we had to. People would have to maintain 2 running copies in order to work on the same collection in 2 separate ways and then manually merge them over. But that is no longer the case. We basically now have the ability to let people collaborate via forking and merging. If you are familiar with GitHub, it's a very similar process. Basically, this is version control. So you click on the ellipsis menu on collections under on the left-hand side panel under the arrow. You click on this ... and down the menu you'll see the ability to create a fork. Creating a fork is essentially the same thing as creating a duplicate. However, that fork has a separate identity that is still tied to the original. So we're going to call this Swagger Pet Store Dev branch. We're going to add it to the same collection, or add it to the same workspace. It'll take a second for the server to create that collection and bring it back down. So now you have this fork that's been created. What's the purpose of this? So obviously it's very, it's very helpful to be able to keep these things joined together. And now I can hand off this collection to Stacy and say, you work on this and I'll work on the original, and eventually we can meet back up. You might have, basically you might have the need to diverge on a project. So say we've been working on an API and we have 2 different versions. Then we need to actually have one collection that represents our version 1, and we're going to be deprecating that eventually. And we need to have another collection that represents version 2, which is going to be our running version from now on. So that is basically a good way to start separating out work. Now, when we make changes to the collection itself, those are the things that are going to be noted and populated over. We're going to be able to merge things back. So let's just look at a simple change that we can make right now. We're going to go to this list all pets endpoint in our forked collection, and we're going to change the value of this query param from integer to string. And we're going to change the max from 100 to 50. We're going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to go click here. Once again, we're clicking on the ellipsis menu, and we're going to go right under where we created the fork, and we're going to click Merge Changes. Now, when we click Merge Changes, this is going to actually launch a browser window and bring us into the, it's going to bring us into the dashboard. So that's something that you should be prepared for. Looks like we have a question. So someone asked over here, are all the folders that they see here forks? No, and that is an excellent question. The way that you can differentiate whether or not something is a fork is you can look at this, basically this little icon right here. As you can see, these two have the same name, and then they have this little fork icon. So these are all separate collections in here, but that is an excellent question. So let's go back to the, where did that go? Let's go back to our merge window. Looks like we had another question. No? Okay. And look at what the merge interface looks like. So we see it has an index of basically all the different changes that might have happened. So see here that we have a URL that's changed because we changed a query parameter. We changed from integer to string. This is doing a simple text diff. on the collection information itself. So this means that any information that might be stored in the JSON for the collection will be noticed when you create a difference or when you make a change. So one thing we walked over last time is the activity feed. So if we look at the activity feed for a collection, we can actually see that the activity feed has recorded the same changes that I made. We go there. So anyone who's familiar with using the activity feed there that is pretty much the same thing that's going on, except now, whereas in the past you might have seen this restore option, we're going to be using that merge option. So here we have the ability to merge all changes. There are 3 options that pop up. You can merge changes, and when we talk about merging and forking, we use the words source and destination. Now, this can get a little confusing because oftentimes you think of the original collection as the source, but in this case, because the changes are coming from the forked collection that we created, this is actually the source in the case of merging. So here we're asking, do the destination then is the original collection. So we're asking what we want to do with both the forked collection, the copy that we have that we've changed, and the original collection that we're trying to push those changes to. We have the option to just update the source destination with those changes. We have an option to merge the changes. So this is called merging. Both update the source and the destination. So make sure that they are now the identical files. And then we have options to merge changes and delete the source. So for example, if this was the end of my small change to the Swagger pet store, all I needed to do was make that one instance while other people were developing, then I could merge and delete. Looks like we have a question. Yep, someone noted that if the source and destination icons were noted in this panel, it would be a really great feature. That's definitely something we can capture, and as a feature request, thank you very much for that input. For now, it's just important to keep in mind that the collection that you are trying to make changes from and put into the original is your source, and the original is your destination. So here, we're going to go ahead and make changes, merge changes simply. I'll pause here for a second and wait for any questions. We had a question as to whether or not any of this can be done with a command line, similar to Git. Currently, this is limited to the GUI. If you are curious about what you're able to do with the command line via Postman, I would encourage you to check out Postman. It is our command line open source runner. It has a lot of things it can do. It can currently not merge in collections, though. The other thing I would encourage you to check out is the Postman API, which will allow you to do some, using Newman and the Postman API, you're allowed to do some collection manipulation. But currently, this is limited to the GUI. And someone is asking if sound is being distorted, they're hearing an echo. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, are people still having sound distortion? Okay, sounds better. Awesome. Do people need what I was just saying repeated about the API in Newman? Okay, So the question that we had was, are we able to perform this forking and merging via command line? And the answer is no. Currently, this is only available via the dashboard and the app, the desktop app. If you would like to interact with collections via the command line, I encourage you to check out our command line runner, Newman, which Stacy has just shared information on in the chat. And if you are curious about using the command line or code to manipulate collections and do things like copy them, change them, update them, I would encourage you to check out the Postman API, which Stacy has also just shared information to in the chat. Using a combination of Newman and the Postman API, you could probably achieve something like this via the command line. So right now, nothing out of the box, but if you're willing to get your hands dirty, you might be able to come up with something cool. If there are any further questions there, I'll leave it for just a second for people to think and ask. Okay, awesome. And actually, if you guys will bear with us for just 1 second, we have to make a small change, and we will be back in 30 seconds. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Thank you for bearing with us. Now let's get back into it. So we have merged our changes from the collection. As you see, what happens when you click that merge button is you end up back on the page for your collection in the dashboard. If we go and look at the app, we can see that that change has happened. And if we go in here now, we can see that the change has been populated over. You can actually go and look at the activity feed here and see that that was also changed just a second ago. Now the other thing we can do is we can check out, see what happens if we try and merge without any changes. You end up with this nothing to merge. So that is a good way to check. You know, it's like, oh, if you've forgotten, oh, are there any changes, or am I at the same place as this other fork? It's a good way to keep in touch. However, so let's go ahead and look at a few different use cases of how this might take place. In this scenario, I'm going to act as Jack. I'm a developer, and I have just started working on the Swagger Pet Store. This is, and we're going to go ahead and delete this initial branch. In our Swagger Pet Store, we want to go ahead and actually, so I'm debugging, I'm working on the API, and I want to add a test just to make sure that everything that's going on when I go ahead and call this or send this request is exactly what I want to happen. For people who aren't familiar, you are able to script within Postman by coming to this the tab bar above the parameters and clicking on tests or pre-requests. I'm going to keep it really simple here. There is a selection of code snippets that you can just pop right into the collection itself, into the code sandbox, and they work right out of the box, so it's perfect. In this case, I am going to basically look to see that the response body contains a string. So I just clicked that and added in. Me, Jack, as a programmer, I really want to be sure that the response body, I don't know, what can I expect it to return? Earlier, we saw that we have example returns. So why don't I just look at that real quick? I can see that I can expect it to say name, ID, tag, long, string. So let's go back and let's say we want it to include the string name. I'm going to save that. I'm going to send. Looks like we had some sort of error. Oh, we are in the wrong collection. So we had a problem. Looks like our test failed. Now we know, oh, looks like we have to go back and change something. So we continue to work and continue to develop, but we don't want to hold up other departments by waiting to fix Jack's silly problems. I want to be able to give Stella in QA and Bob in DevOps the ability to start working on this collection as soon as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a fork for Stella. Fork that collection. And then I will also create another one for Bob. Cool. So now Jack, continue to work on this main collection while Stella is going to come in and say, wow, Jack's really making a mess of things. I want to make sure that his work is actually functional. So Stella might come in and add another test. Let's say she just wants to check to make sure that the status code 200 is functional. And Bob, at the same time, wants to come in and say, hey, I'm not as concerned about what the actual logic is and what it's doing, whether it's working. I'm more concerned as to whether or not my network is performant or my service is up. So I want to look and see that the response time is less than 200 milliseconds. Now we have a case in which we have 3 different collections, all representing this one specific API that that has one central one and 2 divergent forks. Let's say that Stella talks to Bob and she says, hey, my QA tests are ready and I think you should put them into your collection so that as you're developing and running your tests, you'll know whether or not you've broken something. Bob says, that's a great idea. Let's go ahead and merge that back in. And of course, all of this communication can happen in comments. In this case, Bob will be played by Stacy. Add that comment. Of course, she'll get notified. She can always pop in and then say, hey, this is great. Go ahead and merge. You can use this to do things akin to code reviews. So if you are wanting to work primarily in Postman, you are able to actually take that entire workflow and use comments and forking and merging to actually look at each other's code and look at each other's work in the app and make sure it's all copacetic. So in this case, looks like it's all good. So we're going to merge it in. Let's go ahead, see that we've just added the simple test, and we're going to merge all changes. Stella, of course, is going to keep on working, but she'll just make sure that those changes will be merged in. So we're going to merge those. We've successfully merged that collection. Now, if we go back and look at our tests, they should, give it a second to refresh. Have the status code 200. So that's all well and good, but now Bob's collection is out of sync from the original. Oh, actually, no, that populated right over. Interesting. Okay, so Bob's collection is actually, no, Bob's collection is still out of sync, sorry. I read the response time is less than 200 as the status code is 200. And that is that's just a silly trick of the eyes. So Bob's collection is out of sync, and now he is ready to merge his code in. He says, so that comment comes through. Looks like we're having a little bit of network trouble right now, actually. Let me see. Either way, so those comments, they talk to each other, and they decide eventually they're ready to merge. So Bob goes ahead and clicks merge changes. And now we see that we have a conflict. So the issue here is that we have this original body, but now we have two different things. The source has this status code, or the destination, the original collection has the status code test from Stella, and the source, the copy branch, has Bob's DevOps test. We don't want to delete Stella's test when we merge this back in. So what do? If you'll look, there's this handy dandy banner at the top that lets you know when you're in danger of overwriting someone else's work. It lets you know, the original collection has been modified. We want you to pull the changes. All you need to do is click this button, and those changes will be pulled over. So now, if we refresh, I believe, one second, we merge again. Okay, well, it looks like once again, we're having some network issues, but the pull should actually allow you to bring in those changes that have been made to the actual original collection, and then you can add your new code and redo the merge. In this case, it looks like there is some conflict still going on, and we don't want to overwrite what's in the master. So instead, let's just use what's the original, and we can pull those changes in. Now we have that original status code is 200, and we can merge those changes. We'll update the source as well, just so that everything comes over. We give this a second to refresh. And I'll give you guys this time to ask questions if you have any. Awesome. It looks like we don't have any. So you saw in that example the version control will notify you if you're about to overwrite important information in the original collection that you're merging to. You also saw how you are able to resolve conflicts when you do have them. You might have more simple conflicts in your version. Say you might just be able to. If we look at another one, maybe we changed get to a post. Save that. And then let's say that now if we try to merge this, we know that the changing get to a post was likely a silly error. So we had a question about whether or not Bob can see Stella's fork. And the question is that, and we will be getting to that in just a second as to visibility. Right now, everyone who can see stuff in the workspace that we're working in is able to see that information. And I'll show you how you can start to limit that as we move forward. So we can pull those changes and then merge them out. Okay, so now let's actually jump right into that. So we've looked at all of this within the app. What does it look like within the dashboard? There's a few important things to take note of. So we looked at it in the app. Now let's look at them in the dashboard. If we go back to the web, we saw that we got this. Let's go to this demo workspace again. You can see that all of these collections show up within the workspace, and they show up with their the forked icons. And if you hover over these, they will let you know what collection it's originally forked from. When you create a fork, you are actually able to fork it into a different workspace. So if I wanted to, I could fork this into S&P, and I could say Stacy's Publishing. Now we have this specific, and I don't believe this is the original. We have this specific thing that has been pushed into the new workspace. So if that workspace, so for example, if Bob and Stella don't have access to this workspace, since it's just Stacy and I who work on it, this fork specifically will be the only one that, or will only be accessible via us two. If you'd like to restrict access of a certain fork to certain people, you can use workspace privacy controls to do that. We covered those in the previous video. Suffice to say that if you're on enterprise, you can create private workspaces. However, if you are on just a normal plan, you can control whether or not people can view or edit information in workspaces. So you could put the fork into a workspace where only certain people are allowed to edit it. One thing to note is that if we click into the information on the collection itself, there actually isn't any indicator to let you know whether or not this is a fork or an original. So just be careful when you're looking at the actual documentation pages in the dashboard, because they do not indicate whether or not something is a fork or a branch. I'll pause there for a second and ask if anyone has any questions. Just one note, if you do decide to fork something in the same workspace, it will have the same permissions as its parent. And let's walk through one final edge case that we need to think about, where I have been working with this, and I no longer, as Jack, I no longer want to be developing Swagger Pet Store. I've gotten outraged, I've lost my temper, and I decided to delete it entirely. Let's see. Basically, this will delete the collection from all workspaces. Since Stacy can't see that Jack Swagger, Jack does need to chill. Since Stacy can't see Jack's workspace, she might not know that that original fork has been deleted and keep on working on her fork. So if we go and we move to that workspace. Like it's taking a second to come over. Sorry, one second. Let's look at this in the dashboard just for some clarity. Stacy might continue to do this, and she might say, I want to merge these changes back. In this case, you won't be able to merge because there is no destination. There's no original collection to merge back to. So it's very important to keep in close communication and comment, tag people as you work and move things around. However, that doesn't mean that that information is gone forever. Stacy can always continue to fork that collection and just work off the version she has now. So that's just one important thing to keep in mind so that you don't end up orphaning different collections. Now, because that's happened, Stella's QA fork and Bob's DevOps fork have no home to go back to and will exist almost permanently as separate entities. So really important to maintain your originals and make sure that you don't delete them. I'll pause there if anyone has any questions. We have questions as to whether or not there are plans to add reparenting. I can't speak to that right now. To the best of my knowledge, that isn't something that is on our public developer roadmap. That's always available to be viewed on Trello.com. Stacy will be sharing a link to that in the chat. Just as clarification, this pretty much is that wraps up our content for today. If there are no more questions over what we've mentioned here just in the last little bit, I'll sort of tell you what we're going to get into next week, and then let you know about the rest of the webinar. So we had someone ask if there are permission restrictions that can be added to collections and workspaces. There are. So if I create a team workspace, I can make it so that everyone who comes in is either an admin or a collaborator. I can even go say have Stacy come in, and basically I can if I decide to do something like make it so that only she can view it. That is an ability that I have. I also can limit the visibility so that no one else on my team will be able to see this unless I invite them to it. So in this case, only Stacy will be able to actually edit or actually come in and see that collection. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, that the privacy feature is the private workspaces. That is enterprise only. That's an enterprise feature. Someone asked if we can manage repositories outside of Postman. Currently, that's not available. They specifically asked about a GitHub integration. That is something that we do offer in our pro features. And definitely we have documentation on that online. However, it does not relate to Postman's version control features. We had someone ask if there was any way to create a pull request in Postman. As it stands right now, there is currently not. You will need to use comments to just sort of orchestrate that. So it just requires a little bit more team collaboration. As to whether or not that's a feature that's upcoming, I would keep your eye on the Trello board just to look out for that. Okay, it looks like that is about wrapping up our webinar for today. Stacy is sharing out in the chat the link to the next or to the workshop pages that details the next workshop. So as we move forward, next Thursday, we'll be looking at taking what we've learned today and creating these separate workflows with versioning control and using those different collections to power things like mocking, monitoring, CI/CD, and other tasks with these collaborative collections so that you can really start powering up as a team. We'll take those different, the collections we created for Stella, Jack, and Bob, and Stacy, and we'll look at how each person might use them separately. One important thing that we didn't cover today, but is good to know, is that things like mocks, monitors, documentation, when you do create a fork, those objects do not come over. The only things that come over with a forked collection is the JSON for the collection itself. So if you, for example, if you wanted to change the description or add authorization, pre-request scripts or tests, or even collection level variables, those all would come over. However, if you wanted to create a mock or a monitor, that would not populate over. Are there any questions about that? Yes. Someone asked if I could list the things that are not included in the chat. Yeah. Here is a list. I'm environments, mocks, monitors, activity, and documentation do not come over. There are a few other objects that might be related, but will also not come over. The things that you can most definitely rely on to come over is anything that is included when you export a collection. So if you go and look at, this, say we said we wanted to export, exported that, you can save that to our documents, and then actually let's save that to, yeah, we'll save that. Go ahead and save that to our documents, and then if we go and look at that collection itself, you see that it includes things like the actual examples for the collection, things like tests, different requests and saved responses. So we see those internal service areas there. It also includes things like variables, descriptions, anything that is included in this JSON file is what will come over when you do duplication. It's the same it's essentially the same as what would happen when you duplicated before, but this time we just keep that link to the original copy. Does anyone need any more clarification there? Awesome. So looking at, oh no, sorry. For a second, I thought we had another comment. So yeah, next time we will look at running some of these tests with Newman, and all of this will be powered from the same original OpenAPI schema that we imported. So we've really come pretty far from our first steps into the Swagger Pet Store. So look out for that next Thursday. If you do have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me at Scottish Kilt. Or we do have a Medium publication that has actually been changed to better practices now. So I think Stacy can share out the new link in the chat. But yeah, thank you very much for attending.